right, well, we're going to talk about today what's the role of an app in a bot-driven world. And here with, I'm just going to say everyone's first name because we're going to be friendly on this panel. We're not going to be at each other's throats, or maybe we will be, we'll see. To my right is Mike, CEO of Yelp. It's 24 E20.
Yelp E24.
Yeah, I could just, yeah.
Yep, promoted.
What's that?
No, it's, I don't know.
Okay. Michael from MParticle, Adam from TripAdvisor.
Got it.
And Jason
Weather.com.
Weather.com.
Yeah.
Thank you. Having trouble reading that. So I think let's just take a step back. And thinking about the title of this discussion is, what's the role of an app in a bot-driven world? And that's a loaded statement in many ways. Who said it's going to be a bot-driven world? Would anyone want to start out by disagreeing with this whole panel, from the outset, from even the premise of this whole conference?
I'm not sure I'd disagree with the premise of the conference, but I certainly would put a question mark at the end of bot-driven world, right? And ask, we're a decade into the smartphone era, not even, right? The app paradigm has been learned by people for 7+ years at this point. It's hard to imagine that people are going to suddenly unlearn that paradigm and move to conversational or interactive UIs in a way that is sort of defined in a bot-driven world.
But why not? I mean, if the conversational interface is just so intuitive, it's we've seen it with small children, right? You hand them an iPad and they instantly they know how to swipe right away. We know how to talk with each other. Commerce has always been conversational. This is a conversation,
Sure.
Interface. So why would there be reluctance, from consumers or people to?
I think it's because of the interface, right? I think one thing that has been proven over time is that people want better interfaces, not always easier interfaces, right? Not that they're mutually exclusive, but I think maybe even back to the original question, I think the question I'd ask is does anybody outside of this general area even know about bots or give a shit about bots? And I think you'd have a tough time to find people that do, right? We kind of get in our own heads and get caught up in the hype cycle. Mm-hmm. But does some housewife in Nebraska know what a bot is?
Well, I think WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, in terms of messengers, chat-based UIs, whether that's with humans or bots, those are definitely have a huge number, hundreds of millions of users, maybe more. So I think that thing is tipping. But you bring up an interesting point. Two relevant questions are, one, are there certain cases where a conversational UI is actually not the best UI suited for the situation? And two, maybe to that point, what percentage of, let's say, if you have an app, of app makers in this room, or out of the top 100 apps or top 1,000 apps in the iPhone App Store, what percentage of those are going to really change their business and be based on chat? Is that going to make more than a single-digit percentage difference for them in the next 2 years? I'd agree. I'd say probably really low. So I think a lot of what we're talking about here is something that's really important for a few key platforms: Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, and then a handful of startups that'll do really well. But most app makers, if you bet the farm on chatbots this year, you might turn up empty-handed and say, hey, I put my engineering resources on it, it went to waste. You got to think long-term.
But you said something about trying to understand what's the right platform, what's the right use case for a bot versus an app. I was talking with Matt just a minute ago. So you wake up in the morning, what's the weather like? How great is it to? Right. You used to have that weather button on your clock radio. If anyone remembers those digital clock radios, you find the weather, click that. But why not just wake up and yell, hey, Alexa, what's the weather today? Instead of opening your phone, opening a weather.com app or a bot.
So I'll speak to that obviously at weather.com and Weather Underground, and the Weather Channel app. But I think you're starting to see that happen more and more. I think the bot is more of a direct response, right? You ask a question like you just asked, what's the weather today in San Francisco? What's the weather going to be like tomorrow in Napa, because I'm going up there. A large segment of the population still, though, to your point earlier, is still evolving from the web to apps. And so now to go from app to bot is still going to take some time. And from a development resourcing standpoint, putting all your resources on bots right now, probably maybe 2, 3, 4 years early.
Hold on. So internally, let's just try to come clean here. When did bots first enter your mindset, your in workplace discussions? So we've got this app, and should we be thinking about bots? I mean, is it 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago? It's a quick.
My mindset 20 years ago when I bought my first Sound Blaster audio card and it had a little conversational robot. My mindset, it's fascinated me, and I think that's one reason it's so interesting is there's so much sci-fi. But in terms of like making actual business decisions based on bot, it's still a small percentage of our actual business decisions. It's not a major platform. I think there's a few use cases where it actually may, obviously for Facebook Messenger, it's 100% of their focus, or a very large percentage. But for us, still a small fraction now.
Yeah, I think it's also not necessarily bots versus apps, but I think bots as an extension of an app, right? And you can look at a bot as kind of the moon that orbits around kind of the app as kind of the planetary being, right? I think we'd all probably agree bots are great when it's limited use, kind of one-dimensional use. It's about convenience, whereas I think apps are much more about loyalty, right? So it kind of brings people in, and then as the use cases get more sophisticated and get deeper, you have to have a better canvas to be able to transact.
Look, in terms of when it entered, our view, it's hard to answer that. I mean, in its current form, in the current craze, right? Recently, but we've been using HipChat for a while or Slack for a while, right? We've been using interactive voice response systems for 30 plus years, right? Those are effectively bots. And so I think what we're really conflating here is the underlying intelligence of how you ask and answer questions, increasingly complex questions, and the UI in which you can answer those, right? So 30 years ago, you had to press 1 for option 1 or press 2 for option 2. Now then you could say it. Then you could actually ask a free-form question with varying degrees of success. And I agree. Like the use case, I have an Alexa in my kitchen, right? I totally use it to ask it the weather. There's no reason for me to open up an app.
Order food?
I don't ask it to order food. Ask it to play music, right? But I don't ask it, to a complex question where I expect a visual response, right? Because it's not going to do that.
Visual is the key word, right? Yeah. Ultimately, I don't think we should assume it. There's this part of the argument is, hey, when will consumers be ready for bots versus apps? But also, even 100 years from now, there are going to be situations where a visual UI is just better for your task. For example, you're talking about waking up and wanting to know the weather. When I wake up, usually my kids and my wife are asleep. I don't want to talk to some device to get the weather, right? So there's a case to be made for silent, visual, touch UIs. Those are interesting, right? Now you could say, well, you could type out what is the weather. But it's so much easier just to click one button than to type. So when you've got a device in front of you, you're looking at a screen, your hands and your eyes are free. Oftentimes, or like, for ordering food, to bring it back to what we do, we've got at Yelp 100 million reviews and photos of all these great restaurants and their dishes and the food, the chicken tikka masala and the pizza here. You want to look at those photos. That's a lot of times more compelling than talking to a bot and trying to tease out of that bot what might be best for dinner. I think bots are better for the kind of, when Google used to have the I'm feeling lucky use case. So this is kind of what you're talking about, a pretty straightforward request. Yeah. Hey, I want to order from a restaurant. And if you kind of don't care which one, that works really, really well. You can even do a little bit of interaction. But if you want to do a lot of browsing around, you want to choose, if you're in a mode of being a little bit more picky or choosy, that's not going to lend itself to chat right now. It might one day, but even then there's going to be situations where a visual interface is better.
And Mike, I think to your point, if you want deeper content, and whether it's pictures or weather radar maps or whatever it's going to be, you're probably not going to interact with a bot, right? Like you can keep asking a bot, but you say look through tens of hundreds of pictures or whatever, you're going to have to keep asking that bot. You're not going to want to do that. You can just scroll. It's a lot easier experience.
Yeah, another way to think about it, imagine if your assistant, you have a personal assistant who's a PhD from Oxford or whatever. They're sitting right next to you and they're in computer science. They know how to use your computer better than you do. There's some things you might ask them to help you with. But if there's some stuff that you'd rather just do yourself than bother to ask the other person, that's going to be where the bot has a limitation, right? Because the overhead of translating what you want into words sometimes is more than just doing it yourself.
Right. So in some ways, in every one of these use cases, we can go ahead.
Yeah. No, finish that because
I was going to say, in every one of these use cases, we can, you could take an app and really say an app UI is just a stylized UI to take input and give back output, right? And so I agree with the example that was given before, where does every conference need its own app? No, that could happen inside of Messenger, right? But that's just putting this information response back and forth, right, into a container that you might already have on your device. And so there's definitely a case that says, look, some apps shouldn't exist because what they exist for can be delivered through other mechanisms. But some apps exist because the richness of the app is going to deliver all that information better than a chat interface.
Yeah, take a Maps app, for example, right? It's going to be really hard to actually recreate that. You could do voice-based turn-by-turn navigation through chat. But an actual, for someone, I love looking at maps, that's going to have to be app.
Right. Or if you have video content too. I mean, video content is pretty hard right now to consume on a chatbot.
Right, and I think that the weather is, yes, there's multiple use cases. Whereas food, there's only one. I want to eat it, right?
Yeah.
You're not. Whether you might be silent, you might want to see the pictures of the storm. I know forecast, text, I guess audio or video.
I'm just thinking about latency. I'm just thinking about the latency of a chatbot map turn-by-turn directions as you're driving down the street, right? And the thing's just spinning, and you're like, where do I turn? Right?
But so okay. One of the criticisms of apps, though, is the same criticism that's already being levied at bots, discovery, and use. So I don't know if this is apocryphal, but it's my favorite statistic, and that's the amount of times that each app is actually used. Nonce. Less than one time. Everyone downloads these apps and never uses them. They never even use them. They go through trouble to download but don't use them. And so there's all these bots out there too that there's going to be challenges. But so thinking about that, I mean, you guys, everyone has apps, and so at what point is there a KPI that around bots, or what's the turning point where you might invest more resources, devote? Is there a tipping point in the bot versus app internally?
I mean, I think if you look at bots as a means for convenience, and you look at apps as a means for loyalty, I think one of the KPIs that you can start to measure is how many new customers came in through the first kind of initial bot experience and then became really loyal app users.
So new customers then.
Yeah, it could be a great customer.
Not from an app to a bot.
It's non-committal, right? Because I think part of your question was around discovery, right? And there's a lot of friction in going and finding an app in the App Store, downloading it, getting to the point on your phone, opening it, registering for it, and then using it and committing to use it on an ongoing basis, right? So this hopefully gives those businesses that are betting the future of their customer interaction on a mobile app experience an easier way to engage non-loyal customers or convert them from kind of passive customers to loyal customers.
I think for us it's very straightforward. We tend to build to a platform with a few exceptions when we feel like, at least in the United States, there's 10 million people who could actually use it. And especially relevant to food ordering on E24, it's who can transact. So when the iPad first came out, we didn't build an app right away. We waited till it got a little more traction, because otherwise it's this engineering thing. You throw all your engineering resources the first year a platform comes out into building to it when it's smaller than that number, and then you're building to the older version, and now you need to update, put a bunch of engineering resources into next year's version to actually catch the wave of users. So I'm curious if anyone in the panel has seen it. I don't think we're at the 10 million US transacting chatbot users yet on any platform. So if there is an app that's had that kind of success, I'm very curious, or a company.
I could see a case where a chatbot inside of the TripAdvisor app, for example, that I could ask a question and get an instant answer from our forums, right? Because there's a ton of information in our forums, and parsing that through search or parsing that through lists of things is really tough to do. And with machine learning and natural language processing, right, we can go find the answer for you in a conversational UI. So that would
informational, not transactional, no credit card required.
Yeah, that would cross your threshold of like millions of users in a use case that happens right now, which is already inside of the app.
Yep.
Can I see the case where Messenger or Siri or any of the platforms has crossed over that threshold where it's going to be about customer acquisition or a key key revenue KPI? Not yet.
But I guess for all of us, that feeds into these decisions of.
But I want to actually, Jason hasn't said anything.
Well,
But I want to tweak the question for you, because I think you're in a slightly different circumstances, being owned by IBM, having access to Watson. Weather is both on, it's on different, it's got bots, it's got apps, Messenger, SMS. It seems like you're playing around with different ways of delivering weather information. And so is there a different calculation, perhaps, that's not so much business driven, but might be more experimental, and what data might you be trying to gather?
I mean, the premise for us is to inform users and consumers of the weather, right? And give them the weather information. So you're gonna go to any distribution platform for users. And so I like the way Michael phrased it, apps are more loyal consumers. And that is the goal, at least for now, for us, to convert some of these users on chatbots over to our app, become more loyal, engage more. But yeah, we have to be on all these platforms because people want the weather, they're asking for that. It's a nice direct response set of questions, and it fits really well with getting current conditions or forecasts.
So we're talking about apps as sort of, as that customers are endeared to a brand, that they download the app, so there's some loyalty, so on, engagement. Yesterday, there was a demonstration from Slack, and showing how you could work, and Slack's focus on the enterprise and the workplace and so on. But for instance, they showed how it is integrated with Kayak.
Yep.
And so in many ways, and they showed Greenhouse and Trello, and I know there's other examples. But so in a way, Slack becomes the interface. So isn't the loyalty in some ways to Slack, and it's really the functionality is what the consumer, in other words, becomes the Kayak in that case, it becomes a transactional, and not necessarily a tool for loyalty.
I think that's a good case where if the information in some ways is going to be so commoditized, right? Like, help me find a flight for these dates, and that information is so freely available, then sure, it kind of doesn't matter which platform or which UI, and you want that information to be ubiquitous, right? It's when you then start to cross over into either more complex decision making, right? Like, what's the right hotel for my family vacation where my kids want to go swimming and we want to have walking access to good restaurants, right? I don't think that's a great, that's buried inside of reviews, that's buried inside of forums. And users, I'm not sure there's lots of evidence that users don't trust black boxes, right, to spit out the answer. They want to go then sort of trust and verify, if you will, right? And so I think you're going to have that separation between these platforms like Slack being able to help me kind of do a task, right, that I could turn to my assistant and say, hey, just find me flights that match my schedule. That's different than find me this complex, where should I go with my family so we have a great family vacation.
So here are the two use cases where conversational UI, by the way, I'm a major user. Probably every day I do voice-based on my iPhone. So it's funny because I'm sitting here saying, well, apps are going to be the majority of it for a lot of us in terms of engineering. But one is running, driving, walking, anytime. So we were talking about where a visual UI fails you. Anytime your eyes or your hands, or both are distracted, it's a great time to have a conversational UI. I do to-dos and notes all the time. I ask about the weather. I make phone calls. I communicate through, iMessage with people.
Note to self.
All the time. Yeah, Parker Lewis Can't Lose. That's a good TV show. But I'm doing this all the time because that's where conversational UI is perfect. That's where you might have called your assistant, and asked them to help you with something. And now instead, if a bot can do it even better than an assistant, that's awesome. Another one is, even if you're not verbal, if visual or verbal, if you want to interact with other people. So you talked about on Slack or Messenger, wherever you are, if you want to chat with somebody else and say, hey, where should we order food? What should we do? And you're having a conversation, that's a natural place. Where should we travel to? Where should we go? It's a natural place you can insert. And by the way, what's the weather going to be like there? But you do have to ask yourself the converse. If you're visual one-on-one in front of a phone and you're not conversing with anybody else, then is an app or chat going to suit you better?
Yeah, and to Mike's point and to Blaze, your question, I think it's all about personalization and making it a personalized experience. And the chatbot lends itself to a personalized experience, but I don't know if we're fully there yet. I know for us, being owned by IBM, we're integrating Watson and the deep learning capabilities to make it more personalized, to make it so that we know what your preferences are versus somebody else's. But I think we're still very much learning and moving toward learning more about what people want and what people are going to interact with.
As far as what people want, Pizza Hut was here yesterday, and I don't really remember the statistic, but it's like, we all have our favorite pizza, and we order it over and over. 75% of the time, we'll order the exact same pizza, right? And so
Pepperoni, pineapple,
that's yours,
and jalapeno.
Okay, but so let me go back to the Alexa idea and this idea of a collapsing interface. In other words, if I just want pepperoni, pineapple, and there's a half dozen different food delivery services I can order from, I think DoorDash is going to be here this afternoon, and does it really matter? I just want that darn pepperoni, pineapple pizza. So where's my loyalty necessarily? My loyalty is to the maker of the pizza, certainly, the pizzeria, but who brings it to me? I don't care.
Yeah, well, I think he hit the nail on the head. So like you said, the maker. So some people might love Pizza Hut. Other people might love like a gourmet pizza shop in their name. I'm a big fan of Pachi's Pizza right here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then if you don't know the exact pizza you want, then you've got to think about like, okay, who's going to help me find the best? Like, so with Yelp, we've got the 100 million reviews and photos. Like, hey, we can help you find great, this is a highly rated pizza place, or maybe you want to try another type of, maybe you want Thai or Indian or American, whatever kind of genre of food you want. So sometimes it's about going on your existing habit, and then sometimes you're forming new habits. And especially then, I think the app you're interacting with, whether it's a bot or through an app, is really important.
Well,
You want to disagree with something?
No, I think there's two things that we need to be very mindful of, right? If you really get to that place where like my request can be fulfilled by multiple sources, right? Like I'm indifferent. Like first of all, I don't think anybody's indifferent to which pizza place, but like imagine a world where you were, right? Like
I don't want to live in that world.
Right. You end up with a different set of problems. One, you either end up with a gatekeeper problem, right? Who owns the platform and then decides, and probably an auction problem, right? Who's paying to acquire my order?
Right.
And is that really what's best for me as a consumer, right? And I think that fundamentally is takes us in a place that's probably not really a good place for consumers. I could see a different version of what we talked about, which is, my 12-year-old has a shortcut on his iPhone for his Chipotle order, right? So like, why do I have to call him up and get him to he puts in his CHIP, which lengthens to his 3 hard tacos order. Like, why can't I just start a conversation with Chipotle, right? They know where I am location-wise, and let my son, my daughter, me all put my order in, they assemble it together, and I show up and just walk out like I do when I go to Starbucks, right? That's a great usage of a combination of an app and a bot or different chat UIs, right? But I think that's still giving me all the choice. It just made it much more efficient for me to wrangle these different people and preferences together.
It's a shortcut.
It's a shortcut.
Like Domino's did that a while ago, where you could just tweet, the pizza emoji, right? And all that was a shortcut to your preferences in the app, right? So it's an extension.
Right.
Just an extension.
So I guess maybe the 64,000 viewpoint, or looking down, then is it we're reducing things to one word exchanges with Alexa, emoji, all based on the preference, all based on the AI that understands our taste.
It's a powerful use case when it's one-dimensional, right? When you know exactly what you want and you just have to repeat it over and over, or where you're asking really simple, non-complex questions, or when the process is very straightforward, it makes a ton of sense. But sometimes, it is more multi-dimensional than that. Even if I'm in the mood for pizza, if it's going to take an hour and a half to get that delivered, I may want to look at other options, right? And I think that's where it's going to be tough to replace that experience.
Right.
It's also hard, as the dollar, we're talking about, we're interchanging vacations with pizza, right? As the dollar value goes up, in the cruise industry, for example, right? A lot of cruise is still sold over the phone. Why? Because it's a high dollar value purchase, right? People they're not even willing to buy it online. They want to talk to somebody. They want to ask their questions. They want to feel like if I'm going to spend all this money, I need to just feel secure in what I'm buying, even though all that information exists online, right? Photos, reviews, descriptions, like amenities, all that kind of stuff. But someone wants to talk to somebody on that purchase.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, that's, the more considered the purchase, the higher the value is, and so more.
Although the funny thing is, food at much less than people is one of the most heavily considered purchases. People just spend a lot of time researching food.
Right?
The
Let me
whole
visualize tonight's special, right?
This is what's happened, nationwide and worldwide now. Is people have spent, so independent restaurants now are on the rise. This is actually one of the challenges with the pizza companies are facing. So Domino's has done really well, but a lot of the other pizza chains are hurting. Because so many of these independent restaurants in pizza and non-pizza verticals have taken off in delivery, as well as in-person dining.
Right. And so just thinking about it, everyone's got sort of a different line of business, but is there, what's your greatest fear or challenge around bots, coming into your company, coming into your app strategies?
Well, I would just actually...
Or do you see it as opportunity? And I realize we've never really clarified necessarily the distinction.
Yeah, I think before that, though, I think like the big opportunity, right? Like the local pizza place, like they probably don't have like the technical savviness to develop a comprehensive bot strategy, right? So I think the opportunity is picks and axes, right? Is there an opportunity for a company to come along and basically productize that so that really anybody can have a bot strategy to drive, to drive user acquisition or top level sales.
Right.
Yeah. Bot Maker Inc. You heard it here first.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. But so back to internally at your businesses, what Jason, for instance, what do you think about? Is there something to be afraid of, or something to watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything yet to be afraid of. Again, this is an opportunity to get more users onto our platform, engaging with the weather, find out more about the weather, and build that daily habit that we've seen with our core users. I think if people tend to stop the conversation around just the current conditions and forecast, that isn't as advantageous for us. We want people to engage more with our product, the different types of content that we have, and use it on a regular basis. But right now, I don't think there's too many challenges, I wouldn't say.
Right. It's just too early?
Yeah, it's way too early.
I think about it, I take a step back and think about it more from travel is just awesome and powerful category, right? And to reduce it down to something so formulaic and sort of soulless is not, I actually don't think you're doing consumers any good there. So I certainly agree with taking the friction out of things and making it easier for consumers. But I don't want to text a plane emoji to to my app and get back a flight, right?
Scary.
Yeah.
Well, you heard that here first too. Then that will be coming.
And I also think that for bigger brands, I think bots are a channel that they should explore, right? Because they should be everywhere where the customer is, right? I think there's a lot of danger for small companies that would look at bots as kind of a bet the farm strategy to build their business on a single API, whether it's Slack or whether it's Facebook Messenger. I think that history has proven that's extremely risky. So I would probably discourage that over time.
I think for us, the opportunity is around social food ordering, right? So it's similar to what you were talking about. You're going in, you want to communicate with other people, hey, we're having a party tonight, we're having poker night, we're having people over. What does everyone want to order? We're having lunch together. Choose your place, combine it all, roll it up into an order and do it. We already have shared cart functionality now at E24, but it doesn't happen through chat. We have some chat functionality built in, but not on all these platforms, and that is pretty interesting going forward. I could even see social travel. Let's talk about what we're going to do.
Sure. Yeah, let's hone down to options of where we're going to go and have that generate a starter itinerary or a starter list.
Yep.
That's absolutely a good use of sort of the bot doing the legwork that is really frustrating for humans.
Or be suggestive too, based on your what you've done in the past and improving that experience.
Yep.
Yeah, and just we have time for probably just one more comment from everyone, but I'm thinking about this conversation, and in light of yesterday's conversation here throughout the event, about this sort of you know, whether you say the shift from the mainframe to the PC, or client server, you know, and you know and Chris Messina was talking about yesterday about, you know, the web was here, you know, a tree ring with the web in the center, then apps, and then bots, and there's definitely, you know, just keep pushing information, actual data out to the edge, out into, you know, our hands to do things with, and so you know, what comes after bots, you know, for you, I guess is my question. Is it this AI superbot world where it's going to know that your phone's going to know you're driving, start talking to you, or it's going to know you're sitting down and start showing you pictures of, you know, potential dishes for dinner? Or, you know, close on this. One last thought from everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a natural one. It's a concept we've talked about, zero-click ordering. We've actually got a hangry app that goes in and just builds an order for you based on all this intelligence. You just, I'm hangry, and boom, it's one-click ordering now still, but you know, we want to have zero-click. So there is a future where you don't need to ask someone to help you. Somebody just does. You could look at it as a concierge kind of experience where, so a butler, somebody just takes care of you, and there's nothing more to be said.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think the future of the customer experience is obviously going to be driven by the data that's available, right? Getting it from this kind of like descriptive state where it's like, here, people are doing this, to being able to predict what people want, to then ultimately like being really kind of prescriptive about it. Here's what I do to try and basically like drive this behavior. And I don't know if it's like what's really after bots, but I think you know, whatever it is going to be driven on the foundation of being able to capture kind of all the data from the various customer touch points to inform that.
I think communities, right? I think if you take that tree analogy and you come back to, it's always, the web is always about communities, right? It's always about communities of content. And so a bot, again, is just a UI to deliver that community, right? And it may turn out that the right answer after bots is humans answering other people's questions, right? Local experts who can give you a better suggestion, or the crowd giving you a better suggestion of what you do next versus a machine.
Yeah, for us, I think the deep learning capabilities in the AI are things that we're already thinking about, and that's going to happen in the future. I think the next step may be virtual reality. Imagine you're sitting in New York in February, there's a snowstorm. You want to feel like, you know, you want to feel better about the day and everything. You feel the warmth of Maui or Florida or something at that particular instance. That could be an experience that would benefit users.
No-click traveling. Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
guys.
it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.